We're in Daytona Beach. It's June 29th, 2022. This interview is with Gary Green, Director of Bands and Professor Emeritus at the University of Miami. I understand you're not originally from Florida.
No, I came to Florida from Oklahoma. Well, actually, I came to Florida from Connecticut, and that's to say Oklahoma and then Connecticut. Those are two wildly different places to think about. But I grew up in Oklahoma, and I can't tell you why. Well, I can. I guess I was born with a need to care about music and to try to understand it. I don't think that was my thinking at the time. I think at the time music just affected me in many different ways, not just one way, a lot of different ways. But when I was about, I guess 7, maybe, the high school band would participate in the homecoming parade in a small town in Oklahoma where I grew up, in Sapulpa, just outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it was a community of people. Everybody knew everybody. You left your house unlocked. Those people that had cars parked them in their driveway or on the street, and there was no effort to secure things. You were secure just living in that town. It was a real. I was lucky to grow up in such a place where I could walk. I never thought about things like we think about today. When my grandchildren now go for a walk, I worry about what might happen to them as they're out there. But in my time, many, many, many years ago, I'm 79 now, so approaching 80 very quickly. So when I was there, that age, at 7, it was a feeling of innocence, honestly. I mean, it was in my hometown. My mom fried everything. And so it was that comfort, talk about comfort food. That town was comfort. Just the thought of it now is comforting to me because it's home. And I didn't know anything about the band. My mother was into music. She wasn't a musician, but she loved music, primarily jazz. I would hear her listening to jazz and dancing around the house. I can see her doing that. But
so here's the homecoming parade.
Yeah.
And here comes the band.
So I'm down in downtown. I mean, downtown was a road, and the cheerleaders in the school and the community were participating in homecoming. And at the end of the parade, here comes the band, the high school band. And I saw that, and I remember the thrill of seeing. I mean, you could hear them coming first, but then you could see them. And so there was something that happened to me when that band, I mean, the power of the music and the pageantry of it, that just took my breath away. And I instinctively knew that something was going on. I didn't know what it was. I actually wanted to play the trumpet. And the reason I wanted to play the trumpet isn't because I wanted to be a trumpet player. It was shiny, and it was cool looking. And I thought the guys that played trumpet, as I learned it was trumpet, I thought that'd be cool to do. So that's what I wanted, and I wanted that desperately. So as luck would have it, I actually lived with my grandmother. She is the person that actually raised me. But not to be misunderstood, my mother was the provider of funding for our family. My father had left. So it was a very close family. But my grandmother raised me. And so in order to make funds and to make ends meet, she would iron people's clothes. And she would sell knickknacks or cards or whatever she could do to have money so we could have food and be able to live. Now, we were not poor. We were rich in terms of a family that cared deeply, and I knew that. I never questioned my family and the attitude that they had about who we were, and specifically about who I was. Because when you're young, you're either safe or you're not.
Yes.
And so there was never a question. So I didn't know that there were folks that may not be safe, because my home was rich in those terms. But when it came to money, we didn't have a lot. And the home we lived in was not big. And so I'm just writing myself a note here. And so my grandmother would iron people's clothes, wash them and iron them. Well, one of the people's clothes that she took in was the high school band director.
Oh.
I mean, it's just happenstance. It's just, as they say, as luck would have it. And his name was Garth Blake. And Mr. Blake would come, and he would talk to me. I don't remember clearly these details. I just know that he was there, and he introduced me to the possibility of music. And so at one of those times he came to pick up his clothes from my mom. I was there playing, and I remember him giving me a plastic gold 4-valve trumpet.
Oh.
And I thought, this is the coolest thing. I mean, it made, it was those kind of things, it had that little reed thing in it. So it really didn't make music. It was just a toy.
It was
But
like a
to me,
kazoo.
yeah, that's right. But to me, it was real. I mean, it was a real trumpet. And so time went by, and I was in 5th grade. I'm not even sure how old you are when you're in 5th grade anymore. I should know that, but I don't. I don't.
10-ish.
Okay. So they came to school as you did and I did as an early band director, recruiting for students to play in the band. So they bring instruments to the table, and they do everything they can to get parents and kids fired up about playing in the band, and it didn't have to work on me. I wanted to play the trumpet, and so I was so excited. I told my mother that's what I wanted. I wanted to play the trumpet, and we needed to rent one. And rent those years ago. We're talking over maybe 60-some years ago. Yeah, for sure, or more even. And so the rent must not have been much. It must have been maybe a year, maybe $5-10. But $5 or $10 those many years ago was a lot of money. And so I told my mother that I really wanted to play, and she told me that we couldn't because she didn't have the money to rent the horn, so I wasn't going to be able to play in band. And oh my, that was a tough blow to have. So I was fortunate because they also had band beginners in 6th grade. So they went and they did the same thing. They had a rental, and they came, and I told my mother, I said, look, I really want to play in band, and I really want to do this. And she said, I'm sorry, we don't have the money. But the band director, who then, Mr. Blake, had become principal of the high school, and they brought in a new band director, and that was a devastating blow to me. His name is George Bright. Because I didn't think I was ever going to get to play in band, and with a new band director, I just wasn't going to have it. But Mr. Bright somehow knew about the situation. Maybe Mr. Blake told him or something, but he knew. And he said, we can make this happen without a rental, but you'll have to play the mellophone. And he showed it to me. It's basically a mellophone is a wrong hand French horn.
Yes.
And it was ugly. It had no lacquer on it, had dents in it, and it was just awful looking. I didn't care if it played or not. It wasn't a trumpet, and so I was devastated. I didn't want to play it. But I can tell you this: it was the highest, most supreme being that you can think of that caused me to be offered that instrument, because it changed my whole life. I wanted to be in band, and I started on that and struggled to learn to play, but it became my voice to say things that I could not say with my brain and my mouth. And I changed, and because he knew of as I grew older, as I got to junior high school and high school, they bought me French horns that were, great French horns. So I had great teaching, and I had great equipment to play on. So that's my band kind of story. That's what caused me to, and I knew that I wanted to learn about music. When I was in high school, I knew that's what I was going to do, and there was nothing else I wanted to do. That was it.
So where did you go after high school?
Well, it was one other thing when I was young that I think, this is even younger. This is before even the band. This is when I was a young child. In my home where I lived with my mom, there was an alley, and between my house and another small kind of a house, I mean it was very small, were people that lived that were musicians.
Oh.
There was an old piano in there, out of tune, upright, and somebody in there played the fiddle, and so they would get together on weekends or times that I remember hearing them, and I would go over to that house, and they'd be singing gospel songs, and they would be playing those guitars and the piano and singing with such unbelievable joy and passion that's the first thing that really, really got me. And I know it did, because I can still hear them singing. I can still sing it. I can still hear them.
Yes.
And so that's where the root, the seed was planted. I'm sure of that. And watching them, I mean, there's nothing, and you can talk about perfection in terms of performance all you want, but there's nothing like the energy that comes out of a human that's deeply involved in saying what they want to say. And these people singing those gospel songs were convincing. And so that's where it all started, when I was tiny.
Wow. So you took this passion, you were in the band, and where did you go to college?
Well, I grew up, as you can tell, I grew up in a very, very small town in a very caring family with, and I was lucky to be in that town with Mr. Bright. He was a godsend to me. He was tough, but he cared, and I loved him, and he loved me, and I knew he loved us all. But there was something about what he was trying to teach me and I'll tell you about that at the end. But he instilled in me a desire to play. But being a small town kid, I wanted to be a band director, but I was afraid to go to college because it was unknown, and I didn't know if I wanted to be away from home. And so I was offered an opportunity to go to the University of Oklahoma, which is a big school, as everybody knows, and a great school, I might add. And I was afraid to go because I just didn't know if that was for me. So I ended up going to a college, smaller. It was called Central State University. And it was an amazing experience. It was small enough, great players. Oh my goodness. And romantically, I can hear that band, and I can see the things that we did, and it was earth-shatteringly beautiful, and it was also the perfect place for me because I was able to grow. I made a lot of mistakes, and I also did some stuff correctly, but it was a place that I was allowed to first begin to experiment with what it is to be a musician and to try to be a teacher of music, which is really hard to do, if not impossible. But it was the first place that gave me that opportunity. And so I'm grateful to those people. And Jack Sisson was my college band director, and he was a great band director. And there was a guy that came in right at the end before I left Central, and his name was Mel Lee. He was a horn player with the Oklahoma City Philharmonic. And Mr. Lee came in, and he conducted the band. Mr. Sisson wanted to do some work with the ensemble. And he was so different from Mr. Sisson. He had a different approach. His phrasing was open. The phrases were different, and I hated it. And I just was one of those college kids that spoke out about it. I mean, this guy's killing our band. It doesn't sound right, because it was so foreign to me. But after I left there, and many years past that, and as I began to be responsible for teaching music, and this happened. I don't want to skip over anything, but when I was a high school band director, I had an epiphany that Mr. Lee was teaching us something that I didn't understand, but had some kind of look at it through a looking glass, and I realized that was the first opportunity that I ever had in my life to become what I believe today. So I had an opportunity to talk to him maybe 5 years ago.
Oh.
Maybe not even then. Mm-hmm. And he was at lunch with the present band director, the ex-band director, no, the present band director at Central State. The guy who's there now teaching, a great human being and a great teacher. And he was having lunch with Mr. Lee. And he sent me a text with a picture of Mr. Lee. Mm-hmm. He's 90-something. And his dementia was so bad he could barely even get through a meal. And I saw that picture, and my heart just stopped. And I said, I got to talk to him right now. Mm-hmm. If you're with him right now, I got to talk to him right now. And he texted me back. He says, he won't know anything you have to say. He won't know who you are. He won't know anything. I said, I don't care. I got to talk to him. Mm-hmm. So I called him, or he called me through the guy who's a band director, and I told him how much I loved him and how much he taught me. And I remember his teaching very clearly and what he was doing, and I thanked him for mm-hmm. pushing me the direction I needed to go, but I didn't know it at the time. And he, of course, was very kind, but the connection was made, the bond was true through all those years. So mm-hmm. my college experience was terrific, but it was just an opportunity to begin learning. I mean, I had so much to learn. And there's one other thing that I'll talk just briefly about before we go on. My time in college was filled with contradictions and questions, and it was in the late 60s, early 70s, and that was during time of Vietnam. And Vietnam was not a popular war. It was dividing the country, because we had gone through World War II, and the country was complete. But as we grew through that, through the days of Vietnam, there was a divide that happened. I'm not going to deal with politics. I'm going to deal with personality here, my personality. Many of the guys I was going to school with decided they would leave the country to avoid draft. And I was at a point in my college career where I wasn't sure about what was happening to me. I just wasn't sure. But I did know one thing, that I was an American and I wasn't going to leave the country. So for a lot of reasons, not necessarily necessary in our conversation now, I decided that I needed to serve the country. So I went and join the Air Force. I auditioned for a band and was accepted, but music was actually part of the problem. I wasn't sure, and there were other things. So I decided I wanted to try to learn something else. And so I was offered the opportunity to become a paratrooper, medical. That really scared me. So I said, I think, what else do you have? And the guy said, we have an opening in photographic intelligence. And that appealed to me because it was a way to deal with serving the country in a realistic way that I didn't know anything about. So I took it. I went to basic training, and I hope I'm not boring you.
Oh, heavens no. Heavens no.
I took that opportunity and enlisted and served for almost 4 years. I got out just slightly early because the Vietnam War ended. In a way, it ended. Anyway, I went to San Antonio for basic training, and I was there maybe an hour or two, knowing that I wanted to be a musician really bad, but I wasn't going to be for many years. And I could tell you wild stories about that. But in 1968, if you recall, the great piece of Karel Husa, Music for Prague, when Russia was invading Czechoslovakia, I was there on the German border, processing and analyzing film, troop movement in that particular case. So that's basically what my job was. And I learned a lot about myself, and I learned a lot about responsibility. I'm not sure I would want to do it again, but I did it. I served, and I am proud of the fact that I did. And I gained so much from the experience. I knew then, when I got out, that I was going to be a musician, and there was nothing going to stop it. Nothing. And so that from that time on, then I knew that I didn't decide to be a band director. I was chosen to be a band director. So that's what it was.
So it's more of a calling.
It is for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
And thank you for your service.
Oh, listen.
Particularly during that time.
Yeah, it was a tough time. It was a tough time.
So now you've been to college, you've been in the service, and you start teaching.
Yes, I was discharged in Idaho. And I have to tell you, I finished my degree my last year and a half in the service. I was given the opportunity. I was stationed in Mountain Home, Idaho, and I was given the opportunity to go to school during the day and work in my service obligations in the evening at night. And I had no money, so I hitchhiked about 35 miles.
Which at that time was safe to do.
It was.
It's not now.
Not now. But I would hitchhike from Mountain Home, and I was lucky enough to get to know people that I would hitchhike with, so I began to get rides. And went to school at Boise State University, and that's where I got my undergraduate degree. I can never thank the folks and my classmates, my colleagues at Central State for what we did together, but I graduated at Boise State, and I am grateful to Boise for what they allowed me to do, and to the United States Air Force for allowing me to do that, because they could have been really a pain about it, but they let me, and I graduated, and so I was discharged in Idaho. I met my wife, while I was in the service, about maybe a year and a half before discharge, and we were together for about 6 months and married. And now we just celebrated our 54th wedding anniversary.
Oh, congratulations.
So it's great. I mean, she's the best. But there I was in Idaho now. I have a family, beginning of a family, and I'm out of the service, and I need a job. And I got out of the service. I was discharged in November, October, November, in that area. And so it's midterm. I mean, it's mid-year, so there are not going to be any jobs mid-year.
Mm-hmm.
But by luck, in Mountain Home, where we lived, an elementary school job opened. 1 through 6 vocal music, and I took it,
Mm-hmm.
and I loved it. I mean, the joy of teaching young children who are so joyful and in such impassioned, unbridled, thrilled to just sing.
Mm-hmm.
So I went with that, and I can remember crouching down on the floor and looking in their eyes and their little mouths. I mean, you talk about beauty. I mean, that is true beauty. Those eyes clear,
Mm-hmm.
and just sing. And I mean, I couldn't get down on the floor now. But
You could get down, just not back up
that's
again.
right. That's
Yeah.
right. You'd have to have a train of people come get me. But so my first job was 1 through 6 vocal, and you know what? It was a very special opportunity, a luck that I had that opportunity, because I wouldn't have had it if I would have just followed my dream to be a high school band director. I never would have had that, and I never would have had the knowledge of what it is to teach a child that has no idea about anything that they want to do except let this thing that's inside, the energy that's inside of them through music, let it out. And so I never would have experienced that. So I'm lucky. I had that opportunity, and I remember songs. I had my own classroom. Everybody came to the music room. That doesn't happen now anywhere. So kids, it was part of the deal. I mean, I had a grand staff on the floor, and I had music stuff all over the wall, and I could play 1-4-5-1 on all those little songs, you know. And so they all came, and I even had a 4th grade. I don't know why I picked 4th grade, but I had a 4th grade honor choir. I don't know why I picked 4th grade, but I did, and we had auditions, and kids tried out, and then they met after school. I took just about anybody wanted to do it. So we had an extra class in 4th grade chorus, and I can remember singing Shenandoah with those kids. And it was terrific. I loved it. Inside of me was the memory of playing Lincolnshire Posey in college, and I wanted to learn. I wanted to be able to do that, and I wasn't going to be able to do it with 6th grade, 1 through 6 vocal.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided I wanted to get out and see if I could find Lincolnshire Posey somewhere. So I decided to move. So I did.
Okay, we're going to end part 1
Okay.
of your interview at this point. And folks, come back for part 2.